double adaptation finance to at least $40 billion a year by 2025, and to show how they will close the adaptation finance gap. And we need reform of the multilateral development banks to become bigger, bolder, and able to deliver far more affordable finance for developing countries. We made real progress at the Summit of the Future. We must keep driving that forward, including at the World Summit for Social Development and the Financing for Development Conference next year. We must also address gaps in our international legal framework concerning sea level rise to ensure continuing access to resources while protecting existing maritime boundaries, as well as to protect affected persons and, in extreme scenarios, to address the implications related to statehood. Excellencies, we cannot leave the hopes and aspirations of billions of people dead in the water. We cannot allow the wholesale destruction of countries and communities. It's time to turn the tide and save ourselves from rising seas. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary General of the United Nations. I now give the floor to His Excellency Dennis Francis, President of the General Assembly at his 78th session.
His Excellency Philomene Yang, President of the General Assembly, His Excellency Filati Teo, Prime Minister of Tuvalu, Mr. Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Excellencies, dear friends, I stand before you today with a great sense of purpose, hope, and anticipation as I reflect on the transformative strides that we have made collectively to get to this watershed moment. This high-level meeting finally recognizes sea level rise to have an agenda of its own through the remarkable and unprecedented action of the United Nations General Assembly. It is a recognition of the immediacy of the existential threats of sea level rise. It presents realities, its present realities are unfolding before our very eyes. In this century, many of the small island states and low-lying areas will lose considerable territory to rising sea level. Some are likely to become mostly uninhabitable. 1 billion people are now vulnerable, living in low-lying or coastal areas. The magnitude and the unprecedented nature of the challenge demand global action, and the membership rose to this challenge by taking decisive action through the General Assembly. I congratulate the membership for this achievement. I would also like to extend my sincere thanks to the co-facilitators, the ambassadors of Costa Rica and of New Zealand, as well as my climate envoy and advisor, Professor Amakrane, for their talent, creativity, and relentless commitment to achieve compromise and consensus. It would be remiss of me if I did not recognize the invaluable contribution of various coalitions that acted as locomotives to build momentum in the process. In particular, I would like to congratulate the Coalition for Addressing Sea Level Rise and its Existential Threats, the CSET, as well as the Pacific Small Island Developing States, the Caribbean Community, and the Alliance of Small Island States. Excellencies, we need to be clear that while there is room for congratulation, this is just a beginning. This is the starting point to shape an ambitious declaration by the General Assembly in September 2026. The declaration is an opportunity to secure prosperity, dignity, and rights of all affected countries and communities. Through the declaration, we must reaffirm that sovereignty and statehood are inalienable rights, and they are enduring and permanent, notwithstanding any circumstances of sea level rise. The principle of statehood continuity should be affirmed as a tenet of international law and international cooperation. The membership in the United Nations and its specialized agencies is also enduring and permanent, regardless of climate change and sea level rise. Maritime zones and the rights and entitlements that flow from them should not be reduced as a result of the impacts of sea level rise. The positive adaptation journeys of the most vulnerable communities must be better supported. Climate financing is not sufficiently reaching the local level and should not saddle countries suffering from repeat disasters with more and more debt. Climate mobility pathways that facilitate movement safely, orderly, and with dignity are needed. Existing legal gaps in protecting the human rights of affected populations and those forcibly displaced by sea level rise need to be promptly addressed. We should have the required frameworks to uphold the rights of all, leaving no one behind. Concrete programs that support the efforts of affected countries to safeguard their unique culture and heritage, both tangible and intangible, are urgently needed and require the full support of the international community. Knowledge, data, and science to anticipate and plan for the impacts of sea level rise need to better inform policies and planning for adaptation and disaster risk management. Excellencies, colleagues, let us sculpt our ambition into an action-oriented, comprehensive declaration. Let us seize every opportunity to shape the declaration and build the global partnership that can turn it into reality. The hopes and aspirations of the 1 billion vulnerable people are at stake, and we must do everything possible to ensure that they do not become the so-called bottom billion, because we must leave no stone unturned to ensure that we leave no one behind. I thank you.
I thank the President of the General Assembly at his 78th session. I now give the floor to His Excellency Feleti Tio, Prime Minister of Tuvalu.
Thank you, President. Your Excellency, President of the General Assembly, Philemon Yang, the immediate past President of the General Assembly, His Excellency Dennis Francis, Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Excellencies, I am indeed very humbled by the great honor vested in me to speak at this opening session. A honor and responsibility that I accept with humility to speak as a representative of a member state most affected by the existential threats posed by sea level rise. But my country, Tuvalu, is just one of the many affected countries. And I solemnly address this august body, fully aware that the voices of the 1 billion people living in low-lying countries and territories and who are threatened by sea level rise need to be heard. Sea level rise is a global and a multi-dimensional phenomenon that requires global action and prompt response. No nation, no community can address it alone. For small island developing countries, sea level rise poses an existential threat to our economies, to our culture and heritage, and to the land that nourished our ancestors for centuries. The existential threat we face is not of our making, but it will remake us. In this century, many of the small island states and low-lying countries will lose considerable territory to rising sea, with some, like my country, running the risk of becoming largely uninhabitable. As the ocean rises, salt water permeates into the aquifers that provides our drinking water. A rising ocean brings higher tides, and with increasing storm intensity, our villages and fields are devastated throughout the year. Flooding increases soil salinity, reducing crop yields and weakening trees. Infrastructures such as homes, roads, and power lines are washed away. Higher land on which to rebuild does not exist. Our people will be unable to exist on the islands and shore they have called home for generations. Livelihoods are destroyed, families gradually move, community cohesion is tested, heritage is lost, and eventually the very fabric of our nations become increasingly threatened. For many of us, these are the hard realities we experience today, not the projections of a coming future. Yet the agreements reached at annual climate summits and international meetings say nothing about sea level rise, ignoring the plight of entire nations and deterring the voices of the 1 million people impacted. This is why today is a historical moment. This summit finally places sea level rise at the top of the international agenda through the remarkable and unprecedented action of the UN General Assembly. And I congratulate President Francis, his climate envoy, Professor Amagrain, and the co-facilitators, Ambassador Chan of Costa Rica and Ambassador Swalka of New Zealand, for this important achievement. Today is our historical opportunity to turn the global tide and to embark on a common path that secures prosperity, dignity, and rights to all affected countries and communities. Excellencies, today's summit hails a new kind of international cooperation. It raises awareness of the multidimensional nature of the threats of sea level rise. It calls for a comprehensive, multi-pronged approach to address it. Indeed, our meeting today is the kickstart of a responsible and informed process. It marks the takeoff for our global effort to shape an ambitious declaration by the General Assembly in September 2026. Our expectations are very much clear to that end. The declaration must be a strong pronouncement in support of the expectation of the 1 billion people. The declaration shall be an unwavering commitment to our sovereignty, dignity, prosperity, and rights. The declaration must be action-oriented and comprehensive. Towards that objective, we expect the declaration to include the following. Firstly, to ascertain the principle of statehood continuity as a tenet of international law and international cooperation, and to affirm that statehood cannot be challenged under any circumstances of sea level rise. Our membership in the United Nations and its specialized agency is permanent, notwithstanding the impact of climate change. Secondly, the declaration to reaffirm that our maritime zones, as established and notified to the Secretary General of the United Nations in accordance with the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, and the rights and entitlements that flow from them shall continue to apply without reduction, notwithstanding any physical changes connected to climate change, sea level rise. Thirdly, the declaration to call on the international community and regional institutions to enable climate mobility pathways that facilitate movement safely, orderly, and with dignity. We must address existing legal gaps and devise needed international legal frameworks to ensure the protection of the human rights of affected populations and those forcibly displaced by sea level rise. Fourthly, the declaration to devise concrete programs for the international community to support our efforts to safeguard our unique culture and heritage, both tangible and intangible. Fifthly, the declaration to establish dedicated and innovative financing mechanism to support the positive adaptation journeys of the most vulnerable communities. Such climate financing needs to reach the local level and should not burden countries suffering from repeat disasters with ever more debt. Together, we need to develop better economic opportunities and resilient livelihood for future generations. Finally, the declaration to underscore the importance of knowledge, data and science to anticipate and plan for the impact of sea level rise, and to establish a dedicated platform to share best practices, innovative solutions, and necessary data and analysis to support informed risk disaster management decisions in affected countries. Excellencies, addressing sea level rise will merely be an aspiration without new partnership that can ensure higher collaborations, common purpose, and collective effort. We welcome the launch of the Community's Climate Adaptation Facility that will provide climate quick impact grants to our affected community. We encourage the donor community and the climate financing institutions to channel their support through it. Further, I invite you to join the coalition for addressing sea level rise and its existential threats, co-chaired by Tuvalu and Germany, and pressed forward by a group of 10 strong champions, including Morocco, Romania, South Korea, Malta, Denmark, Costa Rica, Palau, Antigua and Barbuda, New Zealand, and Bangladesh. As a coalition for higher ambition, we will continue to work with all of you to advance stronger advocacy, to raise global awareness, and to ensure higher commitment in support for the affected countries and community. Finding the right solutions will require statesmanship and empathy, beginning with an acknowledgement that a situation globally caused must also have a globally just and equitable solution. The international community needs to act now. We cannot afford to wait any longer. I thank you all and wish the high-level meeting all the success. Whakawhatailasi, Tuvalu mo te atua, Tuvalu for God.
I thank the Prime Minister of Tuvalu. We have heard the last speaker for the opening segment. I thank once again the Secretary General of the United Nations, the President of the General Assembly at the 78th session, and the Prime Minister of Tuvalu for their participation and important interventions. I shall now briefly pause to allow our special guests to take their leave from the podium. The plenary segment of the meeting will begin shortly. Representatives are requested to remain seated.
මේ zamaantake වන්දෙන් හල්ලුණු වයි ගෙදරුගේ මස්සලය තාබද ඉරාදු කවියා හල්ලු වෙන්දාන හල්ලු කොද්ද
ಅಳಗುಣ್ಮೆಂಗೆ ಮೀ ರಾಜ್ಯಗ ತರಗ್ಗಿಗೆ ಗಿನ ಮಶ್ರೂತಕ್ಕೆ ಕುರಿಯಂಗ ಬಗೆಂದೆ ಉಮ್ರಾಣಿ ತರಗ್ಗಿಗೆ ದಾಯರಾ ರಾಜ್ಯಗೆ ಏಕಿ ಕಂಕೊಳ್ತಾವುಗ ಕುರಿಯತ್ತ ಮಶ್ರೂತೋಗೆ ಎಮ್ಮೆ ಫಹುಗೆ ತಫ್ಸಿಲ್ತ
ರನ್ವೇ ಮಿಯುನ್ನನಿ ಮ್ಯಾಗಣಕು ತಿಂಬಯಕ ಪಹಾದಾಫ
ಮೀ ಮಶ್ರೂತ ಕುರಿಯಗೆಂದನಿ ಗಿನ ಗೊಂಜೆಹುಂತಕ ಕಾಯಕು
ಹಗೀಗತುಗ ಮುಳಿ ಮಾಲೆಯಂ ಹಲ್ಲೆಂ ಅಣ್ಣಾಣಿ ಮುಳಿ ಮಾಲೆಗೆ ಹುರಿಹಾ ಮಗುತಕ್ ಹೆದಿಗೆ ಮಾಲೆಗೆ ಹುರಿಹಾ ತನಕ ಸ್ಟೋಮ್ ವಾಟರ್ ಡ್ರೈನೇಜ್ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ ಇದ್ದೇವಿಗೆ
ರೈತುಗೆ ಹೋಫೆಂತಕ ಗೊಳಿಫವಾ ಮೀ ಮಶ್ರೂತೋಗೆ ತಫ್ಸೀಲ್ ಅಳ್ಮೆನ್ ಬೆಲು ತೆರಿನಾ ಹಮೆ ಗೆನಸ್ತೇನಾ
ದುವೆಲಿ ಆದಿತ್ಯ ದೋಹುಗೆರೆ 22 ಕಡಿ ಸುಮ್ಮಿನಟುಗ PSMNEWS
حقوقنا ليست للبيع
and the resumption of commercial activity.
hafta animigen dairo duniyeka mashrahuga eta kamen gagande
nadata hadakuram eki faharu eki gotak kitan adutan nerito
duniyeka february